The bitter December wind howled through the cracks of the small cabin as Hazel Andrews clutched her swollen belly, tears streaming down her face. The flickering lantern light illuminated the crumpled note on the table, the last words her husband had left before disappearing with what little money they had saved. Outside, the Montana winter of 1878 showed no mercy, snow piling against the door as if to seal her fate. Hazel trembled, wrapping her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. 6 months pregnant and abandoned in a territory where she knew almost no one, the 22-year-old faced a death sentence as surely as if she'd been left to the gallows. The woodpile would last another day at most. The food, perhaps 3 days if she rationed carefully. Her husband, Thomas, had promised her a life of prosperity when they'd left Illinois. Now all that remained of those promises was the child growing inside her and a cabin miles from the nearest town. A particularly strong gust rattled the windows, and Hazel startled as one of the shutters broke free, swinging wildly against the side of the cabin. Pulling herself up from the chair, she moved toward the door, knowing she needed to secure it before the glass broke. Her hands shook as she fastened her cloak, Thomas's mother's wedding gift, around her shoulders. The moment she opened the door, the wind stole her breath away. Snow whipped against her face as she struggled toward the flapping shutter. Her fingers, already numb with cold, fumbled with the latch. The bitter chill penetrated her bones as she reached up, straining to grab the wooden panel. The frozen ground beneath her feet shifted, and Hazel felt herself slipping, her balance compromised by her pregnant belly. Her scream was lost to the howling wind as she fell backward. She braced for impact, arms instinctively wrapping around her unborn child. But instead of the hard, frozen ground, she felt something else, strong arms catching her, breaking her fall. "Whoa there, madam," a deep voice shouted over the wind. "I've got you." Hazel looked up into the face of a stranger, a man with a weather-beaten face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, his dark beard crusted with ice. His eyes, kind but concerned, were fixed on her as he steadied her against the force of the storm. "Let's get you back inside," he yelled, one arm still supporting her while the other reached up and secured the flapping shutter with a swift, practiced motion. Inside the cabin, with the door firmly shut against the storm, Hazel collapsed into a chair, her heart still racing from the near fall. The stranger stood awkwardly by the door, snow melting from his duster and pooling on the floor. "You shouldn't be out in weather like this," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair with a premature streak of gray at the temple. "Especially in your condition." The shutter. Hazel began, her voice small. "Is fixed now," he finished. "I was passing by and saw the light, thought I'd check if anyone needed help before this storm gets worse." His eyes scanned the cabin, taking in the meager fire, the nearly empty woodbin, and the solitary plate on the table. "You alone out here, madam?" Hazel nodded slowly, one hand resting protectively on her belly. "My husband left yesterday." The stranger's jaw tightened, but he said nothing for a long moment. Finally, he introduced himself. "Yates Blackwood, I've got a ranch about 5 miles east of here." "Hazel Andrews," she replied, then added unnecessarily, "My husband was Thomas." Yates nodded grimly. "Well, Mrs. Andrews, I don't mean to frighten you, but this storm's shaping up to be the worst of the season. You can't stay here alone with no wood end." He gestured toward her obvious pregnancy. "Your condition." "I have nowhere else to go," Hazel admitted, feeling the sting of tears threatening again. Without another word, Yates shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth of it, his warmth, enveloped her immediately, bringing the first comfort she'd felt in days. "Pack what you need," he said firmly. "My horse can carry us both to my ranch. You'll be safe there until we figure something else out." Hazel hesitated, years of proper upbringing warring with her desperate situation. "Mr. Blackwood, I couldn't possibly—" "Mrs. Andrews," he interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "I understand your concern, but that baby you're carrying won't survive the night if this cabin runs out of heat. And I don't make a habit of leaving women and children to freeze to death." His expression softened slightly. "I have a housekeeper at the ranch. Your reputation will remain intact." 20 minutes later, with her few belongings bundled into a small bag, Hazel found herself seated in front of Yates Blackwood on his sturdy buckskin horse. His coat remained wrapped around her, and his arms formed a protective circle as he held the reins. The blizzard had intensified, the world beyond the horses had a swirling white void. "Lean back against me," Yates instructed as the horse carefully picked its way through the snow. "And tell me if you need to stop." Hazel nodded, too exhausted and cold to maintain propriety. She allowed herself to rest against the solid warmth of the stranger's chest, praying she hadn't made a terrible mistake in trusting him. The journey seemed endless, the cold penetrating even through Yates's thick coat. Just when Hazel feared she couldn't endure another moment, lights appeared through the whiteout warm, golden squares glowing like beacons in the night. "Almost there," Yates said, his breath warm against her ear. "Just hold on a little longer." The Blackwood ranch house was larger than Hazel had expected, a solid two-story structure with a wide porch and multiple chimneys puffing smoke into the night sky. As they approached, the front door burst open, and an elderly woman hurried out, wrapped in a heavy shawl. "Yates Blackwood." "I was about to send the hands out searching for you," the woman scolded, then stopped short at the sight of Hazel. "Good heavens, Mrs. Finch, this is Mrs. Andrews," Yates explained as he carefully helped Hazel down from the horse. "She needs our help." Her husband abandoned her at their cabin with no supplies. The older woman's expression transformed from surprise to outrage to sympathy in the span of seconds. "Abandoned a pregnant woman in winter. Some men ought to be horsewhipped." She moved forward quickly, taking Hazel's arm. "Come inside, dear. Let's get you warm." The interior of the ranch house was a revelation: clean, well-furnished, with a massive stone fireplace dominating the main room. The heat hit Hazel like a physical force, making her dizzy with relief. Mrs. Finch guided her to a chair near the fire while Yates disappeared to tend to his horse. "Poor thing, you're half frozen," Mrs. Finch muttered, removing Yates's coat from Hazel's shoulders and replacing it with a warm quilt. "How far along are you?" "6 months," Hazel replied, her teeth still chattering slightly. "Maybe a little more," Mrs. Finch nodded sagely. "Well, you're safe now. Mr. Blackwood is a good man, the best in these parts. You'll stay here until after the baby comes, at least." "Oh, I couldn't impose nonsense, Mrs. Finch interrupted. "There's plenty of room, and it's not as if you can travel in your condition, especially not in winter." She patted Hazel's hand. "Now, let me get you some hot soup and tea. You need to warm up from the inside out." When Yates returned, stamping snow from his boots, Hazel was seated at the dining table with a bowl of steaming soup before her. He nodded approvingly and took a seat across from her. "Mrs. Finch says you've agreed to stay," he said. "That's good. This place could use a woman's touch beyond what Mrs. Finch provides." "I'm very grateful, Mr. Blackwood," Hazel replied carefully, "but I don't want to be a burden. Perhaps once the storm passes, Mrs. Andrews," Yates interrupted, his expression serious. "Winter's barely begun. That cabin of yours isn't fit for a woman alone, much less one expecting a child. You'll stay here until spring, at least." Hazel wanted to protest further, but exhaustion and the reality of her situation silenced her objections. Instead, she simply nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, in a proper bed with warm blankets and a small fire crackling in the bedroom hearth, Hazel felt her baby move. She placed a hand on her belly, thinking about how close they had come to disaster. "We're safe now," she whispered to her unborn child. "At least for a while." Days turned into weeks at the Blackwood Ranch. The blizzard had indeed been one of the worst in memory, burying the countryside under feet of snow. Hazel's cabin, Yates reported after checking on it, had partially collapsed under the weight of the snow on its roof. The news should have devastated her, but Hazel found herself oddly detached from the place that had nearly become her tomb. Life at the ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Mrs. Finch, whose first name Hazel learned was Alina, took her under her wing, teaching her the workings of the large household. Yates employed 6 ranch hands who lived in a bunkhouse near the barn, but took their meals in the main house. Hazel gradually took over some of the cooking duties, finding satisfaction in the simple tasks. Yates himself remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite, asking after her comfort each day but revealing little about himself. He spent most daylight hours working with his men and horses, returning in the evenings with windburned cheeks and tired eyes. Sometimes, Hazel would catch him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unreadable. Christmas approached, bringing with it a brief thaw in the weather and in Yates's reserve. One evening, as Hazel sat by the fire knitting a blanket for her baby, he entered the parlor carrying a small pine tree. "Thought the house could use some cheer," he said, setting it in the corner. From his pocket, he produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. "And I picked this up last time I was in town." Hazel unwrapped the package to find a delicate silver rattle. "Mr. Blackwood," she breathed. "It's beautiful, but I can't accept, please," he said quietly. "Consider it a Christmas gift for the little one." Their fingers brushed as she took the rattle, and Hazel felt a surprising warmth spread through her at the brief contact. She looked up to find Yates watching her intently, something vulnerable in his expression. "Thank you," she said softly. That night marked a turning point. Yates began spending more evenings in the parlor, sometimes reading aloud from one of his books while Hazel sewed or knitted. He spoke more freely about his life, how he'd come west after the war, working cattle drives before saving enough to buy his own spread. He never mentioned a wife or sweetheart, and Hazel never asked. In turn, Hazel shared her own story growing up the daughter of a shopkeeper in Illinois, meeting Thomas when he came through town with tales of opportunity in Montana territory. Their hasty courtship and marriage, the grueling journey west, and finally, Thomas's growing restlessness and resentment as winter approached and Hazel's pregnancy advanced. He said he never wanted a child so soon, Hazel admitted one evening in January, her hand resting on her now prominent belly. "That I'd trapped him." Yates's expression darkened. "Some men don't deserve the title," he said. "A real man doesn't abandon his responsibilities, especially not his wife and child." "And what would a real man do?" Hazel asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. Yates met her gaze steadily. He'd protect what's his, provide for his family, put their needs before his own desires. Something in his tone made Hazel's heart beat faster. She looked away, suddenly conscious of how improper their situation might appear to outsiders, despite Mrs. Finch's constant presence. As if reading her thoughts, Yates added quietly, "You don't need to worry about your reputation here, Mrs. Andrews. Everyone in these parts knows me well enough to know I wouldn't dishonor a lady under my protection." "I never thought otherwise," Hazel assured him quickly. "You've been nothing but a gentleman." A shadow passed over Yates's face. "Not always," he said cryptically, "but I try to be the man my father raised me to be." January gave way to February, bringing with it fiercer storms and increasing discomfort for Hazel as her pregnancy advanced. The baby was active now, kicking and shifting constantly. Sometimes, in the privacy of her room, Hazel would speak to her child, promising a better life than the one Thomas would have provided. One particularly cold night, Hazel woke to sharp pains across her abdomen. Fear gripped her. It was too early for the baby to come. She managed to make her way to Mrs. Finch's room, waking the older woman with a trembling hand on her shoulder. "Something's wrong," Hazel whispered, clutching her belly. What followed was a night of terror. Mrs. Finch, experienced though she was with many aspects of frontier life, was not a midwife. She did what she could to make Hazel comfortable while sending one of the ranch hands to fetch the nearest doctor from the town 15 miles away. Yates paced outside Hazel's door as her cries of pain intensified. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, he entered the room despite Mrs. Finch's protests about propriety. "Propriety be damned," he growled. "She needs help." He knelt beside the bed where Hazel lay white-faced and terrified. "I'm here," he said, taking her hand. "Hold on to me if it helps." Hazel gripped his hand with surprising strength as another pain tore through her. "The baby," she gasped. "It's too early." "You're both going to be fine," Yates promised, though fear clouded his own eyes. "The doctor's coming." When Dr. Morrison finally arrived, hours later, Hazel was exhausted but still fighting. The doctor examined her quickly, his expression grave. "The baby's turned wrong," he told Yates in the hallway. "I'll do what I can, but in these cases." He left the sentence unfinished. Yates returned to Hazel's side, his jaw set with determination. "You listen to me, Hazel Andrews," he said, using her first name for the first time. "You are the strongest woman I've ever known. You survived being abandoned in a blizzard. You can survive this." Hazel looked up at him through pain-glazed eyes. "Stay with me," she asked. "Wild horses couldn't drag me away," he promised. What followed tested them both. Doctor. Morrison worked tirelessly to turn the baby while Yates supported Hazel, wiping her brow, letting her crush his hand during contractions, and murmuring encouragement when she felt she couldn't continue. Just as dawn broke over the snow-covered landscape, a tiny cry filled the room. "A girl, Doctor," Morrison announced, his exhausted face breaking into a smile. "Small, but her lungs work fine." Mrs. Finch took the infant to clean and swaddle her while the doctor tended to Hazel. Yates remained beside her, his eyes suspiciously bright as he gazed down at her pale face. "You did it," he said softly. "You're both going to be fine." When Mrs. Finch placed the tiny bundle in Hazel's arms, Yates watched with an expression of such tenderness that it brought fresh tears to Hazel's eyes. "She's beautiful," he whispered, "just like her mother." The moment hung between them, fragile and profound. Then Mrs. Finch shooed him from the room, insisting that mother and child needed rest. In the days that followed, Yates kept a respectful distance, visiting only briefly to check on Hazel and the baby, whom she had named Grace. But Hazel often caught him watching them with a longing that matched the growing ache in her own heart. By March, Hazel had recovered her strength, and little Grace was thriving. The snow began to melt, revealing patches of muddy ground and the first hints of green. With spring's approach came the unspoken question of what would happen next. One evening, after Grace had been put down for the night, Hazel found Yates on the porch, watching the sunset paint the snow-capped mountains in shades of pink and gold. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said, coming to stand beside him. "Yes," he agreed, though his eyes were on her rather than the view. "Hazel, there's something I need to tell you." The seriousness in his tone made her heart flutter nervously. "What is it?" Yates took a deep breath. "I sent word to the territorial marshal about Thomas. What he did abandoning you, it's not just wrong, it's criminal." Hazel stiffened. "Why would you do that?" "Because you deserve justice," Yates replied. "And because—" He hesitated, then continued more quietly, "because as long as you're still legally bound to him, you can't be free to make a new life." "A new life," Hazel repeated, her pulse quickening. "What kind of new life did you have in mind, Mr. Blackwood?" Yates turned to face her fully. "The marshal sent word back. They found Thomas in a mining camp in Idaho. He died in a card game dispute 2 months ago." The news should have shocked her, but Hazel felt only a strange, hollow sensation. "I see," she said softly. "So I'm a widow now?" "Yes," Yates confirmed. He took her hands in his. "Hazel, I know it's too soon. I know you need time to grieve, even if Thomas didn't deserve your loyalty. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, there's a place for you and Grace here. Not as guests, but as family." Tears filled Hazel's eyes. "Are you proposing to me, Yates Blackwood?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Not yet. That will come when the time is right, with a proper ring and all the trimmings you deserve. For now, I'm just telling you that I've fallen in love with you, Hazel Andrews. You and that little girl of yours." Hazel felt a weight lift from her heart, a weight she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. "I think I've fallen in love with you too," she admitted. "You saved us that night, not just from the cold, but from a life of hardship." "You saved yourself," Yates corrected her. "You had the courage to come with me, to trust a stranger when you had no reason to trust anyone. That's the kind of strength I admire in you." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Hazel met him halfway, her lips finding his in a gentle kiss that held all the promise of spring after a long winter. April brought carpets of wildflowers to the valleys, and the official end of Hazel's mourning period brief as it was. On a perfect Sunday morning, with Grace cradled in Mrs. Finch's arms and the ranch hands standing awkwardly in their best clothes, Hazel and Yates were married by the circuit preacher in the parlor where they had first begun to know each other. "I promise to cherish you and Grace for all my days," Yates vowed, slipping a gold band onto Hazel's finger. "To protect you, provide for you, and be the father that Grace deserves. I promise to stand by your side through whatever life brings." Hazel replied, her eyes shining with happiness. To make a home filled with love and laughter, and to never take for granted the second chance we've been given. That night, after Grace had been settled in the nursery that Yates had secretly prepared a room adjoining the master bedroom, painted yellow with a handcrafted crib and rocking horse husband and wife stood together at the window, watching the stars appear over the Montana landscape. "Are you happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" Yates asked. His arms encircling her waist from behind, Hazel leaned back against him, savoring the solid warmth that had first saved her on that stormy night. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she assured him. "When Thomas left me in that cabin, I thought it was the end. I never imagined it would be the beginning of something so beautiful." Yates turned her in his arms, his expression serious. "I want you to know something. I don't consider Grace to be another man's child. From this day forward, she's my daughter in every way that matters." Tears of gratitude filled Hazel's eyes. She couldn't ask for a better father. "And I couldn't ask for a more perfect family," Yates replied, sealing the promise with a kiss. 1 year later, as summer painted the ranch in shades of green and gold, Hazel sat on a blanket in the shade of an old cottonwood tree, watching Grace take wobbly steps toward Yates, who knelt a few feet away with arms outstretched. "Come to Papa," he encouraged, his face alight with pride as the little girl tottered forward. Beside Hazel, nestled in a basket, slept 2-month-old Jacob Blackwood, his tiny features a perfect blend of his parents. Hazel's heart swelled with contentment as she watched her husband scoop up their daughter, swinging her high in the air as she squealed with delight. Life on the frontier remained challenging. Droughts, harsh winters, and the constant work of the ranch tested them regularly. But each night, as Hazel and Yates tucked their children into bed and retired to their own room, they remembered how close they had come to never finding each other. "Do you ever think about that night?" Hazel asked once, as they lay together watching moonlight spill across their bedroom floor. "How different things might have been if you hadn't ridden by my cabin." Yates gathered her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I believe we were meant to find each other one way or another, but I'm grateful it happened when it did." "My cowboy," Hazel murmured, smiling at the memory of that heavy coat wrapped around her shoulders, her first taste of the protection and love that would become the foundation of their life together. "My heart," Yates replied simply, the words containing all the devotion that had transformed two broken paths into one journey shared. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, no longer a harbinger of loneliness and fear, but the familiar soundtrack to a love born in the darkest winter and destined to bloom through all the seasons of their lives.